Ironically, the day after they vote to cancel the winter fuel payment, it's been hailing here at Grey Matters Towers, and it kind of still is, so I apologise if the noise filters through. Well, they've gone and done it, haven't they? All those spineless Labour MPs who were against cancelling the winter fuel payments caved under threats issued by emails and personal phone calls before the vote. You know, if they had the courage to vote with their consciences, they might, have been thrown out of the party, but it's unlikely Starmer would have wanted to dilute the size of his army. But if they had been cut loose, it would have sparked by-elections, and let's face it, it's unlikely now that those constituencies would vote Labour again, which is another reason why they wouldn't get thrown out. But having seen what Reeves, Miliband and Starmer got up their sleeves, I suspect the voters would be quite cautious. And those MPs cut loose could have done a huge amount of more good for the country as independent MPs, free of the party political shackles. Well, we're going to unpick some of the detail and have a jolly good rant. Feel free to join in. Welcome to Grey Matters. Hello and welcome to Grey Matters, the channel that promotes the fact that the older generation still matters and looks at issues that matter to the older generation. Now, before getting into this, let me just preempt any comments that accuse us of spouting Tory views or right-wing views. Let's be very clear, the views expressed on this channel are pensioners' views. Now, obviously we can't claim to speak for all pensioners, but judging by the majority comments we get, we're certainly speaking on behalf of our subscribers and many of our other viewers. So, that said, yesterday, the 10th of September, Parliament voted to withhold the winter fuel payment from about 9.3 million pensioners.
The ayes to the right, 228. The noes to the left, 348.
Fair enough, you might say. A proportion of them don't need it, but there were several million who did. But it's the sly, underhand way it's been done. Initially sprung on an unsuspecting nation on the 29th of July, Reeves then rushed it through without allowing for any scrutiny, much to the annoyance of the House of Lords Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee. They drew the new winter fuel payment regulations to the special attention of the House of Lords, and they told them, "We are unconvinced by the reasons given for the urgency attached to laying these regulations and are particularly concerned that this both precludes appropriate scrutiny and creates issues with the practicalities of bringing in the change at short notice." Now, they were also concerned by the announcement from Ofgem that energy costs would rise by about 10% this October, which is about £150 for a typical household. Now, the committee suggested the Lords should ask the government if it had considered the impact of the changes to the winter fuel payment and the increases in energy costs happening at the same time. And on top of that, they were concerned that the continued freezing of personal tax allowances meant more pensioners will also have to pay more tax. Yeah, interesting. Reeves, of course, stated that the triple lock pension increase would more than cover the hole left by the axing of the winter fuel payment, but that's total and utter nonsense. The triple lock rise is a cost of living increase. It's not just for fuel. Prices have gone up across the board for everything. Daily essentials, transport, and many pensioners need that rise for everyday living. If it all has to go on fuel, then they're no better off. And for some, it really will become a choice between heating and eating. Then there's another scrutiny committee that Reeves neatly sidestepped. All benefits regulations are required by law to be considered by the Independent Social Security Advisory Committee, the SAC. And it is generally done in advance of the legislation being laid. However, in this case, Reeves rushed the vote through on the 10th of September, knowing that the SAC wasn't even due to consider the issue until the 12th. She opted to invoke something that's called the urgency provision, which allows the independent SAC considerations to be retrospective. And she said the removal of the winter fuel payment was too important and too urgent to wait for the SAC's scrutiny. Ye gods. The SAC was very unhappy about this, and they asked the Department of Work and Pensions what the effect would be if they had an adverse report before Parliament, and if they had to put it after the legislation had come into effect. Well, the answer they got was, well, if you've got any recommendations, just add a statement to the report. And as the committee noted, that actually didn't clarify the situation at all, and it still remains unclear what the practical impact of any statement might be on regulations that have already come into effect, which they're due to do next week. Well, I can answer that for you. Nothing at all. If the government can be that underhanded to rush this appalling legislation through, then there's nothing a scrutiny committee can say that will change their minds. And what we need is for the SAC to get their report before Parliament, before the new regulations come into force next week. However, I understand that Reeves would have to cooperate for that to happen. God help us. Now, Reeves was also asked if she had done an impact assessment, and she stated that a full impact assessment had not been prepared because there was no significant new impact on businesses, charities or voluntary bodies. Now, my first thought was, what have they got to do with the elderly? Surely the impact is on the people that would have benefited, the pensioners, the elderly. And it's a fact that living in a cold home, particularly if you're housebound, significantly increases the risks of illness and death. And living in those conditions will certainly impact on those organisations and charities that support elderly and vulnerable people. I hadn't considered that. Well, over the winter of 21-22, 45 people a day died from cold homes. That's more than 13,400 more deaths compared to the average non-winter months. And that was with the benefit of the winter fuel payment. Yeah, as I said at the beginning, it's ironic, isn't it, that the weather yesterday turned really wintry on the day they had the vote, and today we've got hail, which appears to have stopped at last. But then none of this affects Reeves and the other MPs, does it? She claimed more than £3,000 for heating a second home. £3,000! Bearing in mind she's not there full time, she must have left the heating and lights on all flipping year. It's hypocrisy at its finest. Expenses for heating and other costs, as far as I'm concerned, should be excluded from MPs' expenses. It's a huge slap in the face for the elderly. Now, when we come back, we'll have something to say about the proposal to remove the single occupancy discount on the community charge. It'll be interesting. See you in a moment. Hello and welcome back. Now, as you probably know, Angela Rayner has refused to rule out scrapping the 25% single occupancy council tax discount. This doesn't mean to say it's going ahead, but she's made a point of refusing to comment on it, which is quite ominous. Now, if this goes ahead, more than 8 million people could see their tax bill skyrocket, and certain regions will be affected more than others, particularly those in the north, with Blackpool, Norwich, Nottingham and South Tyneside being hit the hardest, followed closely by Liverpool, Hastings, Kingston upon Hull and Hartlepool. Now, analysts have reported this would cost householders as much as £600. But the community charge, anyway, is a big fat con. I bet, like me, you thought the tax went straight to local council to pay for all the local services, police and fire brigade, street cleaning, that sort of thing. Well, that's not the case. It's not that simple. Your hard-earned cash doesn't go straight to your local council, it goes straight to the Treasury, where they spend your money on all sorts of policies and initiatives that you probably knew nothing about and would probably disagree with, such as on the migrants and foreign aid. The government then dribbles down some of that money to your local council to spend on all the things it said it was going to spend it on. However, the Treasury never gives them enough to fulfil their needs, and so the next year the tax has to go up again. Like I say, it's a complete con. As for the single occupancy discount, most people, I would suggest, don't necessarily choose to live alone. I'd venture that the vast majority are pensioners who have been bereaved, and indeed this plan has been dubbed the widow's tax. And then there are single parents, most of whom are women. So it seems clear to me that this proposal is also sexist under the Equalities Act. And I believe there's actually a legal challenge being prepared on that basis, just in case Rayner tries to push it through. So hard-pressed single mums who struggle to find local employment that fits around school hours and holidays, and who have to find the money for childcare when that doesn't work out, will now also have to find loads more cash for their community charges, or potentially default and potentially go to prison. And the pensioners who have lost their winter fuel payments, who might now have to use their pension increase to fill the void that's left, will now also be faced with hugely inflated tax bills. How thin are these people supposed to spread their pensions and live and survive? It's a national disgrace, and this government, like any government who tries to bring this sort of thing in, should never be elected again. Now I can imagine what you're all going to be saying in the comments, and I'll enjoy reading them. I really don't know what to make of all this. It makes you feel quite depressed. I just caught a glimpse of something a moment ago before I started recording this that suggested that the bus passes were also in line for being withdrawn. So they certainly seem to be making the pensioners the targets for most of their savings. And when you think that 9 billion of that £22 billion so-called black hole is apparently because of their pays that they gave to the civil service, the train drivers and the doctors, that black hole isn't that bad, is it? Particularly as they must have known about it, because the Treasury accounts, everything is there for anyone to see. It's a public document, and the Shadow Treasurer, Rachel Reeves, should have had plenty of time to look at that, see what was happening and start preparing. Yeah, depressing, isn't it? Until the next time on Grey Matters, thanks for joining us, and it's bye for now.